The center of the Iranian regime has entered a state of shock, and what we see now is open, harsh, and increasingly dangerous pressure against Iran's new leader. Early this Sunday, April 19th, 2026, the crisis took on an even more serious tone. Because the very base that always supported the regime began to react with fury to what it saw as surrender, confusion, and weakness. What's at stake is not just an ordinary political dispute. What is unfolding is an internal rupture at the heart of Iranian power. Who is at the center of all this? On one side, the new Iranian leader, who remains silent and hasn't appeared publicly. On the other side, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, lawmakers, regime-affiliated channels, and groups that have started attacking those involved in negotiations with the United States. This is where it explodes in Tehran, within the very power system of the Islamic Republic, but with direct effects in Hormuz, in the military control of maritime routes, and in the narrative war that the regime tries to wage so it doesn't collapse from within. The crisis escalated when the Iranian foreign minister stated that the passage for commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz was completely open during the ceasefire period in Lebanon. This gesture landed like a bombshell inside the regime. The reaction was immediate. Parliamentary leaders, commanders linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, and channels aligned with the hardline faction began to question the announcement, saying that it seemed like giving up the only real leverage Iran still had against the United States. For many people within the Iranian establishment itself, opening Hormuz without extracting a concrete concession sounded like capitulation. That's why the riots take on a deadly and symbolic weight. In this sense, these are not ordinary opposition protests. The prevailing interpretation is different. Some of those who took to the streets are actually the very base that has always supported the regime, now outraged because they believe the Iranian leadership backed down, gave in, and lost the initiative. The anger would not be directed only at an external enemy. It would be directed against people within the government itself, against those who spoke of negotiation, against those who announced that it was open, against those who, in the view of these groups, gave up a strategic position without getting anything in return. How does this split manifest? It appears in the clash between the diplomatic narrative and the military reality. While the foreign minister spoke of an open passage, the message coming from channels linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard said something else. Hormuz remained controlled, restricted, and under military supervision. At the same time, statements from hardline circles began to demand explanations, denounce confusion, and insist that the silence at the top be broken. The message was clear. Someone talked too much, someone gave in too much, and now the regime is trying to contain the damage. This tension grows even more because no one really knows who's in charge. This is one of the main speculations dominating the crisis. Iran no longer seems to act like a government with a single command. What we see is a struggle between several centers of power. There is the negotiating wing, the military wing, the parliament, the ideological channels, and they all seem to be trying to secure their place for the day after the war. Whoever negotiates with the United States and comes out looking like a winner gains strength. Whoever appears weak may be pushed out. It's in this environment that the perception grows that the regime may be slipping towards something close to an internal war between factions. And the absence of the new leader only makes everything worse. It's been more than a month since his selection. But he hasn't appeared on video, hasn't issued an audio statement, and hasn't given the public a direct sign of authority. Only texts have been released. This opened the door to a devastating suspicion within this line of analysis. If no one sees the leader, if no one hears the leader, then who is really speaking for him? The speculation is no longer minor. There are those who openly raise the possibility that he is incapacitated, isolated, or even dead. It's an extreme suspicion, but the very vacuum in leadership fuels this kind of interpretation. At the same time, the foreign minister's position became even weaker when statements from Donald Trump and the United States Central Command came out, reinforcing that the American naval blockade was still in place. The message was direct. No matter what Tehran says, Iranian ports would remain under pressure. This point is decisive because, in the view of those who criticize the negotiation, Iran gave up its main weapon without changing the reality at sea, without ending the blockade, and without getting the economy out of crisis. That's when irritation turned into a political attack. A lawmaker connected to the regime even said that the foreign minister would face impeachment proceedings for his statements on social media if it weren't a time of war. Another important figure warned that Iran is losing the psychological war and the battle over narratives for not acting quickly and not controlling the message. In other words, according to this interpretation, the regime has not only lost military strength, it is also losing the ability to convince its own base that it still knows what it is doing. The situation became more serious when the Tasdak agency, which is connected to the regime's circles, described the foreign minister's statement as bad, incomplete, and generating ambiguity. Furthermore, it reiterated that any ship wishing to pass will have to coordinate passage with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. After that, the president of the parliament stepped in to attack Trump, deny the idea of total openness, and state that the rules of Hormuz would be decided on the ground and not on social media. This shows a regime that has lost control, contradicts itself in public, tries to erase what it said hours before, and reveals to the whole world that its chain of command is fractured. There is yet another explosive suspicion in this story, that part of the Iranian senior leadership's digital communication is being conducted from the United States by someone deeply familiar with American culture. This increases the sense of hypocrisy and decay. While the regime talks about resistance and sacrifice, its members and their closest circles would be protected far from the chaos they helped create. For the population facing inflation, fear, isolation, and bloodshed, this weighs heavily. In the end, what this crisis shows is simple and brutal. The Iranian regime seems less like a cohesive machine and more like a fractured block, nervous and distrustful of itself. What's happening is an internal struggle for power. The ones fighting this battle are the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the political leadership, and the negotiators. This is exploding now, after the statement about Hormuz and the silence of the new leader. This is concentrated in Tehran and in the military zone around Hormuz. How this moves forward is through public contradiction, the anger of the base, and attacks between factions. And why? Because the feeling of surrender has opened a wound that the regime may no longer be able to close. In the end, Iran has entered an even darker stage. It's no longer just external pressure, it's internal collapse. And when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps starts acting as the real center of authority, the demand for the leader's departure stops sounding like a distant rumor and starts sounding like a sign that the top of the regime may truly be shaking.